Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nikki Parisi. I'm the COO here at the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. APA is a private nonprofit located in Washington, D.C., and we serve prosecutors as well as our law enforcement partners and community partners. Today's webinar, Unveiling Carver County, Exploring Intersectionality Through Interactive Mapping, will be presented by Hannah Fordyce and Nancy Yates from the Carver County Attorney's Office and Justin Hollis from the Wilder Foundation. This presentation is made possible by grant number 2019 YABXK001, awarded by the Office of Justice Programs through the Bureau of Justice Assistance. APA is very appreciative of their financial assistance and a commitment to improving the criminal justice system. Points of view or opinions in this presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily represent the views of the United States Department of Justice and the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys. So on to our speakers today. First, we have Hannah Fordyce, who is an advocate and trainer who currently serves as the Victim Witness Outreach Coordinator for the Carver County Attorney's Office in Minnesota. Hannah has a BA in psychology and an MA in human services, forensic behavioral health. She has experience working with various nonprofits and government agencies around the areas of domestic violence, general victim services, and community outreach and education. Next, we have Nancy Yates, who has served as the Victim Witness Coordinator with the Carver County Attorney's Office since 1997. In 2019, Yates was promoted to the Division Manager. Nancy's strength is working with vulnerable victims, and she has great skill in coordinating all facets of the criminal justice system to support the victims and prosecutors during the pendency of the criminal case. Nancy has taught on issues related to crime victims' rights, victimization, and multidisciplinary teams. Nancy graduated from Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peter, Minnesota, with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science in 1995. She then graduated from the Minnesota Paralegal Institute with a paralegal certificate in 1996. Yates is also trained as a crisis counselor. And finally, we have Justin Hollis, who is a research scientist with the Wilder Foundation. Justin specializes in policy research and program evaluation, data science, and economic analysis, and uses survey data, social indicators, and demographic and geographic analysis for measuring progress, exposing inequities, and promoting informed civil discourse on issues of shared quality of life. Before joining Wilder Foundation, Justin worked as a senior policy analyst in a county government, preceded by stints as an economics instructor and research assistant in several university education, social, and health policy research institutes. He holds a master's degree in economics from the University of New Mexico and a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of St. Thomas. So without further ado, I will pass this over to the presenters to get started. First, for some housekeeping measures. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to type in questions and we will get to them as appropriate during the presentation, but then definitely towards the end. So please make sure you're utilizing that. And if you have any other questions to AP in general in terms of webinar help, you can also use the chat function. So let's there we go. Okay. So I guess before we get started, I wanted to give a little background on how this all started. So this came through an initiative called the Justice for All Initiative, and it's a grant sponsored by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. And so we call this JFA, and it provides support to state and local governments to ensure compliance with the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution. So a big piece of JFA is collaborative partnerships and working with stakeholders, and that's why you'll see here the JFA partners include the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, APA, the National Center for State Courts, and the Research Triangle Institute International. And so it allows us to really do a collaborative and encompassing assistance to jurisdictions through hitting kind of each stakeholder. So we've been really successful in working with jurisdictions throughout the entire country. And so excited to talk a little bit more of how this played out and what came out of it in terms of crime mapping. So Hannah, to get started, why don't you talk a little bit about Carver County and then why you've reached out to JFA and applied for technical assistance to get this started in terms of getting the crime map going.
Absolutely. So Carver County is a really interesting county in Minnesota. You can see it highlighted there on the map in red. And we are one of the main counties that's sort of in a 5-county metro area around Minneapolis and St. Paul. So Carver County is the fastest growing county in Minnesota currently. It has a population of around 108,000 and a growth rate of over 17% in the last decade. So that equates usually to around a 1.5 to 2.1% growth increase per year in our population. 77% of our population resides in the most northeastern section of the county, and that's something that you're going to see when we get into some of the crime mapping aspects. But it's a really unique county because the upper half of it is more urban, and then the lower half of it is still a lot of farm country and smaller towns that aren't super accessible unless you have a vehicle. I would say the average time to drive from some of the smaller outlying towns into our main sort of populated centers, which would be like Chaska, Chanhassen, if you're from Minnesota, you might know those names, is around 25 minutes. So it is a pretty substantial distance. We are also ranked as the healthiest county in Minnesota. We were from 2013 to 2019. And sort of a favorite phrase that goes around in the campaigning world in Carver County is the healthiest, wealthiest. And although that's a great catchphrase, we working in the victim services industry know that that is just not a reality for all people in Carver County. And so one of the things that does tend to get shoved under the rug is that with growth comes growth in all aspects. That includes growth in crime, that includes growth in victimization, that includes growth in some of our lower socioeconomic status individuals, and also growth in non-native English speakers. And so, sorry about my husband closing the door there. So that was a really interesting aspect of Carver County, is that especially over the last 10 years, we've seen this increasing disparity between our really wealthy population and our lower income population, and as well as where people are locating. If you can switch to the next slide there, Nikki. All right, so again, with increased growth comes increased crime and victimization. This is a screenshot off of the crime mapping that we did. This is just for the last year. This was 2023, from January 1st to December 31st. It's a heat map, so you can see the more populous areas over there in the Northeast. But in the last decade, we've seen an increase in our crime, especially in some of our more severe criminal cases that have serious victimization. So our adult felony caseload has increased by 15% over the last decade. That's tracking pretty well along with our population growth over the last decade. And we've also noticed that increase in some of our more severe cases. So for example, our adult criminal sexual conduct victim cases have increased by 30% just from 2021 to 2022. And so when we look at those cases, the concern for us is, how do we ensure that individuals across the county are able to get access to the resources they need, and where do those resource gaps exist, especially when we're talking about a county where most things are going to be centered up in one part of it that's geographically distant from where some of those victimizations are happening. You can change, Nikki. So we found the JFA grant and decided to apply for it, specifically with the purpose of recognizing that many, many factors can increase someone's risk of being victimized, their ability to engage fully in the criminal justice process, and the long-term impacts of victimization on their well-being. And so we wanted to create the victim witness risk and resource map as a visual tool to help confront and remove barriers for those impacted by crime or at risk of being impacted by crime in Carver County. Things that we included in this were lack of access to transportation, affordable housing, where service centers are located, and food relief resources. The goals were to identify the geographic locations in our county that may have lower income levels, where there may be specific communities where there's higher levels of limited English speaking proficiency, where we really need to do outreach that's culturally specific, increased victimization rates, and locations where all of those assistance and transportation sort of corridors are. We also wanted to show the intersection of crime victimization, risk factors, and barriers to accessing resources. We wanted to aid in identifying and addressing resource gaps, and finally, create a visual tool that's not just for us in the county attorney's office or individuals who maybe work in the nonprofit or government world, but also for the people in the community that need access to these resources. How can we create, sorry about my dog whining. Let me move him out of my room really quick. We also wanted to make sure that we had something that community members could access and they could have a real visual representation for what was available in their community as far as transportation, as far as housing resources, and for food resources. And I think that's what I had for my sum up there if you want to pass it off to Justin.
And before we move over to Justin, could you also talk a little bit about the refugee population and how that affects everything in terms of trust in the attorney's office, prosecutor's office, and how the concern of trying to make sure resources were provided to that community?
Absolutely. Yeah. So because we are growing, we're sort of the outer ring of the Twin Cities metro area. We're getting a lot of growth and a lot of trickle down too, especially a large growth in the increase of our refugee populations. Uh, so one of the things that we're noticing is challenging is that we have very limited resources that are culturally specific and language specific. When we talk about offering someone resources or removing barriers to their ability to either participate in the criminal justice system or their ability to engage with resources in a meaningful way, those aren't accessible to them if it's not in a language they understand, if we don't get the needs that they might be having and the specific challenges they're facing. And so, a big thing we also wanted to do with this project is how do we start to highlight some of those uh, community groups that maybe aren't being catered to right now, where we're not meeting them where they're at. We have this expectation that they should be able to come to us instead of us going to them. Really making sure that they're seen, heard, understood, and that they have the access to resources and they know those resources exist. Because we could have all the resources in the world, but if we don't have a way to communicate that and make it very easily accessible, it's not something that they're going to be able to get a hold of as well. So
Okay, and then finally, as we move into how we started working with Justin, could you just give an overview of the data that you had in your office that you could easily get to, or maybe not so easily get to, but that you had access to before the map kind of came in and put it all together? Because that may be helpful for attendees to know, okay, I have this data, but like, what am I supposed to do with that to get to a map? And I know obviously we had the help of Justin, but to know like what was the starting point?
yeah, so our another thing that's interesting and unique about Carver County is our county is predominantly covered by a sheriff's office. So we have one single city that has a police department, and that's Chaska. which is also the county seat. But the rest of the county is covered by the sheriff's office. So one thing that we have that was convenient for us is both the sheriff's office and Chaska Police Department. They maintain sort of a map of their crime map, right? They have all of that data, but they're separate maps. And they're also harder to find. They're usually for a small subset of time. So we did have all of that information. It just wasn't put into something that was like simple and easy to access. And then a lot of the resources you're going to see on here, those are ever evolving. So this map is something now our county is updating while the research helped us put all of it together. Like say, hey, here's a heat map of, the crime over the last year. Here's the census information. That's something that we could have had access to as well. Here's um, all of these different resources that you could maybe find in a resource manual, but let's put all of them side by side so we can see how they're all interacting. And you have kind of a one-stop shop that gives you access to everything at once.
Perfect. Okay. And so Justin, we'll come to you now. So I guess to start, if you want to give a little bit of what the Wilder Foundation does, who you are, and then we can get into what you did for Carver County.
Certainly. Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, just a little bit about our organization. Our namesake, Amherst H. Wilder, was a wealthy businessman at the turn of the 20th century and established this trust fund in his will, really focused on assisting, folks in the city of St. Paul. Upon the deaths of his wife, Fanny, and his daughter, Cornelia, this fund called the Amherst H. Wilder Charity was established. And by 1910, the state legislature had sort of taken up this charity. Research has always been a part of the foundation. And so you can see here that, more than a century ago, we conducted our first research study. And since then, we've grown to be a nationally recognized research group, along with the direct services that the foundation continues to deliver to our communities here in the Twin Cities and beyond. I think the next slide is just a little bit about me, as has been mentioned, my background, but kind of really what brought me into this work is my expertise in demography, data science, and policy analysis, and with a skill set in geographic information systems. And so when the conversation started between the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, that they really wanted to support Carver County in this vision of creating an interactive tool that really highlights the interplay between crime victimization and other risk factors, socio-demographic and economic characteristics of communities that are impacted by crime. So things like income level, access to resources. So I really, sort of started this work off collaboratively by listening to what that vision was, and really kind of paying really close attention to, who it was that was going to be utilizing this tool, what kinds of information they were wanting to draw from this tool, and really taking some cues from Hannah and her colleagues as to how I could make this as accessible and user-friendly as possible. So I think that what you'll see in the demo that we have established for you here coming up is that we really took sort of a two-pronged approach. One was a bit more of a narrative approach, where we wanted to walk users through very specific kind of connections, intersections between, socio-demographic and economic risk factors, along with where crime and crime victimization were concentrated across the county. Hannah alluded to the sort of diversity of the county in terms of having a sparsely populated land area, but also having a fairly high concentration of population density sort of connected with the broader Twin Cities area. And so it was important for us to really focus on victimization. And so, we did things like filter out traffic stops and things of that nature, and really wanted to focus in on where the county attorney's office, and specifically the division of victimization and witness services, could focus their resources and efforts to make an impact.
Okay. And I think we can go into the demo now, Hannah, and you can show, I think it might be helpful because it is that kind of two-prong approach of how is the county using it, and then how can the community use it, and if there is a difference. So if that's something you want to highlight during your demo, or just kind of show how it's used. And I think it would be helpful to see how user-friendly it truly is.
Would I be able to add something really quick?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so I'm Nancy, and I'm was introduced the supervisor for the unit. And one of the things that I found myself continuing to need to do to justify staff and to apply for grants was there was an expectation that we explain who our underserved population was in Carver County. And again, going back to what Hannah said about the healthiest, the wealthiest county in the state of Minnesota, as a victim services provider, I knew that we had underserved individuals. I knew that there were people within our county that were underserved, and I couldn't provide through our division the level of service that I thought they need to effectuate their crime victims' rights, or even to help them rebuild the life that they wanted to have. And so as an example, as just some of the raw data that Hannah gave the overview for, 14.5% of our population in Carver County is the aggregate number for our non-white population. Our highest population in Carver County is the Hispanic Latino population. It's just under 5%. The next highest percentage is our Asian population, and that's about 3.33%. And then the next population after that is our African American population, just a little bit more than 2%, with the aggregate of 14.5%. And then in particular, one of the populations I feel like we struggle with the most is our individuals that are in our county that are non-native English speakers. And that percentage is about 7.25% in Carver County. So those are the raw numbers that we have, that we were trying to figure out where are these populations? How can we identify how we can serve them better? What are the roadblocks to their service? Why is there an increased rate of their victimization in the county? And then the only other population that I can say that we would consider part of our underserved population would be our individuals with one or more disabilities. And we estimate that to be just under 6%, which is 5.8% for the county. So if you can kind of understand when you're looking at this map, what our raw statistics are, and how sometimes when you're in victim services and you're having to justify to individuals that you do indeed have underserved populations that experience a higher rate of victimization in your county, when you're listed as the wealthiest county in the state of Minnesota, that was where those two things just didn't meet very well. And this map brilliantly shows those intersections between the land location, the pockets of population, and why we've struggled to try to do some outreach and help people understand what victim services are in Carver County.
And to that point, Nancy, I think it obviously highlighted what you already knew to be true. Was there anything having the map presented in the way that it was kind of surprise you, or did you find anything out new as you're looking at the data through that lens?
I think that Hannah and I, when we looked at it together the first time, and she'll go on to explain, how her work intersected with Wilder more than mine did, because she really spearheaded this. But you have that light bulb moment. You're like, this is what I felt the whole time, but now I can see the raw numbers on a map, and I can help people understand what it is that they can't understand when you hear some of the details about the jurisdiction that we work in.
Okay, great. And so Hannah, I don't know, do I need to stop sharing my screen?
Oh, can you not see? I have my screen shared.
Oh, wait, let me stop. There we go. Okay, I think I need to stop mine. Okay.
Perfect. All right, so this is on our main webpage. We'll drop a link for that so you can find it if you're curious and you want to play around with the tool later. But this is what the Victim Witness Risk and Resource Navigator looks like. So it starts out, and sort of the first page here you can see is just an outline of our general county. You can already sort of see where our population centers are. Obviously over here in Chaska and Chanhassen, right along that northeastern side is where you really see the city built out. And then we sort of have these pocket cities that are located throughout the county in Victoria, Waconia, Norwood, Young America. So the first slide that you go through is crime pattern calls. This is all of our victim calls from 2023. And so this is going to include assaults, burglaries, thefts, property damage incidents. These are obviously more centered in our population centers. We removed traffic accidents, even if some of those are victim crimes, because they really cluttered the map. And they were just really centered along the main transportation corridors, so along the highways. We just decided that wasn't giving as much value because we also weren't getting where that person resides or really where those crimes are happening. Like that could be people outside of the county that aren't needing to access resources necessarily in Carver County. So that is the first map. The second slide is a heat map. So we thought this was kind of a nice visual representation. You can see over here in Victoria, Chanhassen, Chaska especially. These are our really big hot spots for crime and crime victimization, but we have those pockets that follow over here in Waconia and Mare, Norwood, Young America, Hamburg. So anywhere, people are more populated as well as sort of interspersed throughout the county. And I think the ones that are interspersed throughout the county are really interesting and you should note them because those are people who, the distance from someone who is victimized way over here on the far west side of the county, for them to get over to our, resources, which are predominantly going to be over in that Chaska Chanhassen area. And we'll get to that later in the map. That's an extreme distance for them to be traveling in order to access resources. So the next slide we have is going to be by census block group, and this is our low SES group. So we have these sort of highlighted. You can see again, we're going to have some of our more intense pockets right in downtown Chaska. But we have some over in these other areas of the county as well. And again, note that those are further away from those city centers. We have the public assistance and income by census block group as well. We have sort of a similar thing happening here. This was a really great I want to draw attention to the blocks, the blue blocks in the top corner that give us sort of narrative, because we made this tool something that was accessible for the public, for people just residing in Carver County. We wanted to make sure that we were also describing why this is something we're drawing attention to. And this is something that Justin did an amazing job with, noting that being on public assistance, being a lower socioeconomic status, these can be really highly correlated with vulnerability. And that's why we wanted to pay attention to these areas in specific. You can move on here to our limited English speaking proficiency. This is going to be things that we have, we want to pay attention to, especially as the county grows, especially as it gets more diverse. Historically, Carver County was a predominantly white, predominantly middle upper class county. especially because it was a lot of farming communities. And so people who'd been there just forever farming. So as we continue to add more diversity, we want to continue to make sure that our law enforcement is paying attention, that they're having good translation services, because that's something that can really impact safety and vulnerability and risk. We want to make sure that our office, as the attorney's office, is able to offer, our victim letters, like that those initial contacts are being sent out in their native tongue, that it's not something that we're expecting that they should have to request a translator from us. We should be giving them the option to choose right off the bat what language. And hopefully if they're being referred from a law enforcement call, that's something we already have a knowledge of, like what language they're speaking, we should meet them there. So you can see here some of these pockets that if you click on, it's going to give you an idea of the limited English language proficiency in each area. So it's not just a block that's useless. You can see on there what degree we're dealing with. Over here for service centers, these are specifically looking at the locations that you could go for referrals and assistance, including housing and financial assistance, childcare assistance, mental health resources, or STOP benefits. The reason you see so many of these in Chaska and Waconia, almost all of them, is because this is our government center in Chaska, and then we have a bunch of branches of that extend over into Waconia. Now, here's a place where this differs a little bit if you're a community member versus someone in a position like me, maybe, who's already familiar with these service centers. You can zoom in on these and you can select them and you can find out exactly what that agency is. So this is Love Inc. They offer emergency assistance. It gives their address, it gives their phone number, and it gives their website. And you can do that for any of these different locations. And that was part of why we wanted to make it a useful tool for everyone, not just for our purposes. We also have housing resources. These are pretty limited, as you're going to see. We basically just have a few places over here in Chanhassen and Chaska. Same thing, you can click on it. This is our CDA, which is our economic development. We have Launch Ministries, and then up here we have Hope House. So we have a few different places. But again, you're going to see the running issue is that there is a very heavy lack of access to resources anywhere outside of that far northeast corner. Over here we have transportation. This one should freak you out. So that is our public transportation. We have one line and it does not go very far into the county. Now Southwest Metro Transit, which is who provides this, that is their regularly offered services. They do have a call ride service that goes throughout the county as sort of a Band-Aid in the meantime. But with the rate of the county's growth, this is one of the most common issues that we hear. It is just repeatedly a problem for the victims we're serving, especially. It was one of the biggest reasons that we had an interest in doing a map like this, was because we were like, oh my gosh, we're constantly serving victims that live 30 miles away and they can't get to court. They don't have money for gas. They don't have a car that's functioning. And if you don't have a car, you're stuck. If the only place you can afford housing is down in the south part of the county because that's where it's more affordable, you can't afford to get to a job. And so it's a real catch-22 that happens, the lack of transportation in the county. Then we have our food relief resources. These are Justin did a great job with this. He gave us like different icons for different types of food resources. Again, you can click on them. So we have the Humanity Alliance here. We have some different kid food programs. We have a few different food shelves. And then we also included community gardens. Even though those are seasonal, there's still options for fresh produce. So happily, our food resources are a little better distributed because we do have some of them out and around in the county, especially some of those community gardens, because again, farming communities. but they are still largely going to be up in that same northeast corner that almost everything is in. So this was going to be all 10 slides we had. And then the thing that we wanted to do to make this really interactive was create this multi-layer tool. So if you go down into the bottom little tabs here, you go through the layer slides first, get kind of a lay of the land, and then you can click on this multi-layer tool. And so what this does is you're going to click down on the little hamburger menu here, and you can choose specifically. We did this to look at victimization and how this is going to interact with other access to resources or things that maybe increase the vulnerability of a certain population. And so if we took the victimization heat map on part of the county here, you'll see the slider that's over on one side. And then I could do something like, oh, let's see how that is layering with our, what should I pick here? Like public assistance. And so now I can slide back and forth here and see how these are lining up. So Chaska, I have this really bright center of the crime map. I can see that I'm also dealing with some really more public assistance is needed in those areas. I know I have a specific vulnerability that's sitting right there that needs to be reached out to. So anytime you can use the heat map or the actual crime map that has the dot for all the different types of crimes on it, and you can zoom all the way down almost to the street to see where those crimes are happening. And then you can choose on the other side any of those vulnerability risk factors or any of the relief, food relief or housing relief resources, and then sort of slide back and forth and see how those are interacting. So that is the map. And we do have, didn't mean to scroll there. We do have information about it on the top as well as some directions on the bottom, so you don't have to remember everything I just said. But it is a really fun and interesting tool to talk through, look through, experiment with. And it's something that we're going to keep updating annually every year. So the hope with that is not only is that great for the victims we serve, this is something we can direct them to if they're looking for food resources, if they're looking for housing resources, but it's also something that we can use when we're talking to our county commissioners, when we're talking to schools and organizations and nonprofits, are like, here are the very obvious gaps, and here's why we need to address those gaps. And people do well when you can give them a visual cue of how that is, playing out in their county.
And we did have a question about race and ethnicity. Was that included in the map at all that you're able to view, or are there plans to include that?
Well, I mean, I can speak to that just really quickly. I do recall it coming up in conversation, and one of my questions was, how will that change the way that you deliver services? I mean, Hannah just mentioned housing, food resources. I think that regardless of race, ethnicity, folks sort of have similar need there. And so the language slide, I think, can be an interesting proxy for that, right? Because there are a variety of languages spoken in Ramsey County homes. And, if you have a group of Spanish speaking households or a group of Somali speaking households, then you can really do something to tailor services for those populations. Whereas if we're just looking broadly at race, ethnicity, there's not a whole lot of tailoring that you can do based strictly on race, ethnicity. So that, I think that that's kind of where that conversation went. Nancy, Hannah, I don't know if you have any other recollections of that conversation. But yeah, is it a possibility? Certainly. Is it rural Minnesota? Yes. So yeah,
No, I think that's pretty much how the conversation went, where we talked about it, and then I think you just gave us a really good question to think about, like, what are we going to do differently if there's a pocket of of a specific population in a different part of the county, and the answer was nothing. We wouldn't do anything differently. But like in response to that question, one of the things the map did do for us is it helped us for outreach purposes to make sure that we were focusing outreach in those areas. And by outreach, I mean like tabling an event, making sure there's brochures, providing brochures in a spoken language. And so those are all things that we've tried to do. We're a pretty small group. There's 4 of us in our division, and we always have one, usually 2 interns. So the amount that we can spread across a geographical area of our county isn't as big as a division that has 20, 30 staff. But we've been intentional to make sure that we put ourselves in a place where people we can extend an arm to them and try to provide information. Like Mayor is one of the cities on the map. It's northwest, and so we intentionally go to an event there that doesn't draw as many people as an event in Chaska, but it is a group of individuals that we have a more difficult time servicing, letting them know there's victim services, because as ironic and as difficult as it might be to believe for people who are in the system, when we just did Night to Unite, so every victim witness staff partnered with a deputy in Carver County and did a ride along with them went to Night to Unite parties. And at every single party, when I introduced who I was and why I was there was at least a handful of people that said, oh my goodness, I have no idea that was even a possibility. So there's so many people that just truly don't understand victim services, and that when law enforcement leaves, there's somebody there to help. So I just want to put that out there. Like that's one of the things that we used for it, and kind of where our conversation led us after that question.
I do think it's a jump, like this map is a jumping off point. I mean, the hope is always going to be to continue to build on it. One of the things that we'd love to see build on it in the future is by having an additional layer that's going to talk about our some of the culturally specific services and organizations that are in the county, so that if someone is uncomfortable, like maybe they're native Spanish speaking and they're part of the Latinx community, like if they feel more comfortable talking to someone who we partner with, that's a nonprofit that works specifically in that community and understands the challenges and barriers they face, we have a way to direct them to where that is. So it's just a continued evolution of how do we address the growing pains that happen in a county that's really rapidly shifting.
Right. And this question I think is for you, Justin. In terms of, Hannah has mentioned that you've been very thorough of like including information like public assistance data. And in your experience, why is that important to include in something like this? And are there other resources or other data that jurisdictions should be thinking about that they may not generally think about from a prosecutor's office, from a victim witness office, that would be crucial in allowing them to kind of see a full picture?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think in conversation, we sort of came to the conclusion that reliance on public assistance not only indicated, sort of risk for higher victimization, but also indicated a connection with services that might be kind of an entry point for victim witness services to make contact with communities who might be victimized more frequently than folks who are not or are less reliant on public assistance. And so we wanted to really draw as many different facets or characteristics from the community that might indicate both risk and opportunities for victim witness resources to reach them.
Okay, great. And then we do have a question about Carver County. Do you have any state prisons in the county?
We don't, no. We have our jail, the women's Shakopee prison is really close to us in Shakopee, which is in Scott County, about 5 minutes away, 10 minutes away from the government center in Chaska, but none in the county.
Got it. Okay, and so I know that this map is only a few months old, but has there been any ability to change any policies or remove some of the resource gaps from kind of the information? I know it's like you knew this was the truth, but to be able to take it to those who may have the ability to change policies or change the ability to get resources, have you been able to see any success there?
So I think one of the
I
really,
think, yeah,
do you
go
want to go
ahead,
to?
Hannah.
Okay.
No.
I was going to say, I think one of the really interesting things that this has been helpful with is there's a lot of conversations in Carver County right now around uh, specifically food relief resources and transportation are two of the biggest needs that we hear about. So I'm part of another organization called Project Linkage that our office sits in on. And one of the things that they're really working on right now is lack of access to transportation. So we've been talking about, here's our one byway, and this is a problem. It's great that we have all these other, food relief resources throughout the county, but we don't have a lot of housing resources. We don't have a lot of access to the government center, which is where you're going to have to apply for public assistance. Like, these are consistent problems. And so this has been helpful in those conversations. It's also been helpful because there is a food coalition that's starting in Carver County that's looking to network all of the food assistance programs. Specifically, one of the ways they've done this is like Thanksgiving last year, providing Thanksgiving meals is like, okay, we're doing this in 4 different parts of the county. How can we work together to make sure that every single home has Thanksgiving dinner? And it's going to be the same thing now. They're talking about like, how do we network all of our local food resources together so that these pockets that exist where there are unmet needs, where food isn't making it to some of these outlying towns and communities, especially if they're not even in one of those small towns, but in the really rural parts of the county, like, how do we get food to them instead of always expecting them to come to us? So we are seeing it as like a useful visual tool in some of those changes. But hopefully there will be a lot more opportunities to come as well.
And if I could add just
I
really
think one of the
quickly,
things
the collaborative, I was just going to say the collaborative nature of the work really helped us to, they helped push me to think differently about what a resource looks like in a particular community. And so it was really a process of uncovering resources that we may not have traditionally thought of as being part of that network, that safety net of services to support families and individuals.
And from the map, one of the things we looked at when we were just introduced to it and clicking on it was one of the food resources that's listed in Norwood Young America. Like, we clicked on the link. It's only open like 2 days a month. So it helps you put the pieces together. The resource might be there, but what's the value of that resource? How often is it there? And how accessible is it for other people? And so I think that's been really eye-opening too, and just been a conversation starter to try to say, like, look, yeah, we understand that this organization is there, but they're really only accessible 6 hours a month. Like, is that really a resource that is reliable for our population that needs that kind of service?
Very, very good point. And kind of more specifically to that, and I don't know if this is necessarily an issue that you individually deal with, but do you think that this could be used, or have there been conversations of how this could be used with like the county executives on budgeting to be able to say like, okay, here, very clear, red flashing lights, this is where we need services. One, do you see an opportunity, or have there been any discussions of that being useful?
I can just say, I know that one of the biggest pieces that Hannah and I have done is brought this to our county attorney, who wanted it front and center on our webpage because he thought it was a pretty amazing resource. And he's the person that's tasked with advocating for our staff. And I know that he indicated to us that he was going to be using it in his meetings with the finance director, with the county administrator, so that he was going to be using it as a resource for himself. I'm looking forward to be able to using it in some grant writing and things like that, so that I can point out the information now more specifically or directly about what it is. But I think that if anybody takes a look at this map in Carver County, that I hope that they very quickly see like the heat map, like those things that just, I think people don't want to believe are issues in their neighborhoods.
Yes, very true. And then for you, Justin, how, if someone's listening right now and they're like, okay, I want to do this, but maybe they don't have concise data, or they don't think they have concise data to be able to say, here, Justin, make me a map. So one, if you're kind of starting with starting from scratch, what can you do? And then more practically, from your perspective, could people reach out to you? What services can you offer if they're looking to do something similar that Carver County did?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to invite everyone to, who's thinking about that to reach out to me. It was a highly collaborative process with Carver County. And I think that, these conversations can really start to be productive. One of the very first things that I would advise anyone thinking about taking this route to do is, I'm sure that all of the organizations and agencies represented here have a service area. And so that would be one of the very first things that I would have a conversation about is, who do you serve? Where do they live? And how do you think about your regional partners? The other thing I would recommend is, really partnering with those regional partners, those other agencies, so that we can think about what those different layers of services and resources might look like. Like I say, so the conversation that we had with Carver County, and specifically with Hannah, was really sort of sharpened the ways that I asked myself questions about, is this a resource in the sense that it could be supportive of individuals and families who might be interacting with the justice system, or who might otherwise be in need of victim and witness services. So I encourage anyone to reach out to me. We do this kind of work all across the country, and it was especially rewarding to do it for our neighbors here in Carver County. We're located in the city of St. Paul, but we're all sort of one metro. And I would be excited about having that conversation with anyone. I think earlier I had our contact information on one of those slides. But yeah, wilderresearch.org would be step one if you wanted to reach out and start the conversation.
Okay, great. And just a reminder, I know we have a few minutes left. If you do have any questions, you can use the chat function. But in the meantime, Hannah and Nancy, both of you, what do you think is kind of like the biggest takeaway from this entire experience of like creating this map, now having this map, that you would want to share with the audience?
I can start, but I also want to say there is a way that this is being used that I was like, oh my gosh, why didn't I say that immediately? So we're actually in the process right now of beginning to set up some community resource centers across Carver County. And so that's a long process. But one of the things that needs to be decided on is where we're going to put those locations. And are we going to have some kind of a brick and mortar, or are we going to keep them at public libraries, or move them around the county at different days? This map is built to help something like that. I mean, it gives you such great data about the types of sorry about my dogs, the types of people who might need these kinds of resources.
Okay, great. Nancy?
I think the biggest takeaway from this map is that it it can do one of two things. It can either validate that, yep, you're on target, your instincts are right, or it can tell you, oh my gosh, you're missing something and you need to focus your energy there. And I think that it did both for us. Like I said, like it validated this is our underserved population. These are the places that we need to focus more. But then again, like it pointed out things like I talked about with the food shelf that was only open 6 hours a month in Northern America. Like it points out things like that, where that's where we need to relook as well. I think those are just great starting points for us. In for counties that are built like us, that we, in the world that we're in right now, I think so many agencies like myself have to justify to get grant money to be able to say who's your underserved population. And when you say underserved population, I think a lot of people have an idea that populates in their head. And if that idea isn't what your population is, sometimes it's a challenge. Like, I knew who were the hardest people to communicate with, who the hardest people were to work with. I knew who that was just from case experience. But this helps explain who your vulnerable population is and where to target your resources and target your energy.
Well, and I also think none of this happens in a silo. When someone is dealing with one vulnerability, they're usually dealing with multiple vulnerabilities. And so this helps give us a fuller, better picture to understand the complications in our case that, a lot of our victims are dealing with. They might be dealing with food insecurity, they might be dealing with housing instability. And these things can happen, all at the same time. They're not isolated to one thing. And so it also helps us be better informed and connected. It helps give us something to hand them. And it helps break down, I think, the silos that often exist between different nonprofits and government agencies, which, to Nancy's point, are sometimes competing for funding and therefore don't always play well together. It's like we're all on the same team. We're all trying to reach the same people. How do we do that as effectively as possible and build up, like Justin was saying, those safety nets in the community for people so they don't fall through the cracks just because they don't live in our population centers.
Okay, any last thoughts from you, Justin?
No, just thank you for inviting me to be a part of this process, a part of this conversation, and very much looking forward to sort of continuing the conversation, not just with Carver County, but anyone who's present who is inspired by what they've seen.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here and talking about this experience. And thank you so much for the attendees for being with us on a Friday afternoon. I am going to link a survey. If you could please fill that out, you'll also be receiving that via email. It helps us provide no-cost trainings and tailor it a little more to what you're looking for from us. So again, thank you, Justin, Nancy, Hannah. This is great, and I'm excited to see kind of how it evolves into even something greater. And yeah, if you have any questions in terms of webinars with APA, you can email us at webinars@apainc.org. And I do believe we're going to share the slides as well, so you should be getting those via email. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend, and hope to see everyone soon.